Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Reimagining Main Street podcast. I'm Laura Richards.
And I am Patrick Lee, CEO of Spark Business Institute.
And we're here today to talk about the reciprocity gene versus scarcity mindset.
And which I'm sure was intriguing for all of you to hear that mouthful.
So, Patrick, why don't you start us off by telling us a little bit why we picked this topic today?
Well, we picked the topic mostly because it got into my head and it started boring in my head a little bit. I'm watching how everything's sort of come to a stop here, and I'm watching the whole networking, business building, searching for leads, chamber events and all, and folks have really sort of lost their way. I know we all jumped onto Zoom for a while, and people were finding ways to engage through informational Zoom meetings and all, but the whole networking thing has ceased to function a little bit. And I think folks are wondering, like, how does a network function during this? How do you network? So I figured let's talk about it.
I think that's a good idea. And honestly, Patrick, I think even before COVID-19 happened, there were kind of two schools of thought in terms of networking. There were people out there that were working BNI groups and looking for leads and contacts purely, let's trade information and let's see who we know. And then there were people who really cultivated a network. And they did that by looking around their community and being strategic and working together. So what do you say about that?
Well, I think that's incredibly important, because I think that's the whole scarcity mindset versus abundance mindset, right? If you're looking at folks around you as competitors, right? And so we can't engage, we can't share, we can't do any of the collaboration pieces because, I need all that business to myself. If you think that way, then you're probably not engaging to your network or your business community in a way that is going to benefit you as much, right? There's a whole lot of collaboration out there, and the lack of feeling, I guess, confident in your own shoes that you're going to hold your own, and a rising tide, all boats float up, right? Whatever the right way of saying that is. If you're not thinking that way, then you're probably very defensive, and you're probably not engaging in that way. And I think actually you are set up to talk about that a lot, because your business, or one of your businesses, was in a business center with all sorts of strip malls, with all sorts of businesses, and yours is a restaurant, and there were tons of restaurants in that space. But you had to be aware that, yes, you wanted to draw your fair share of clientele in, and you had to compete against other restaurants, but at the same time, empty storefronts, people not doing well, none of that was going to do you any good either.
Well, and I think that's a really important point given what people are experiencing now. And we've talked in previous episodes that some of you folks have probably already heard us talk about, when businesses collaborate to invest in tents together, to invest in tables and chairs together, to share space, and create community that way during COVID-19. For some of these folks, it's the first time that they've looked to the neighbor on the right and the neighbor on the left and said, hey, let's work together. That works in other ways too. One time when I ran restaurants, my power went out and I had a huge catering order, and I called the restaurant, down the way a little bit. And I said, you're not going to believe this. I have a ginormous catering order. I've got no power right now. Can I come use your grill? And I packed up all my chicken and steak, in the coolers, and I went to their restaurant facility and I cooked everything off that I needed to for my catering order. But if you don't have those relationships in place, when those opportunities or crises, and whatever the case may be, happen, you're not going to have that out.
So let's talk about reciprocity there. So you felt totally comfortable calling them up and saying, hey, I got this situation. And they were like, okay, come over and do this. Now, what was the reciprocity? What then were they able to ask you at some point, or where did that sort of come back around?
Well, for anybody that either is or has been in the restaurant industry, there are always times where, you know, you run out of 22-ounce lids for your 22-ounce cup. There's another restaurant that does that. So that's one example of where that comes in. We traded gift cards for holiday gifts for our staffs. You know, barter. That's another way, you know, just another opportunity to save money. I used to have a relationship with an Outback Steakhouse, and they would give us, you know, gift cards, $10 gift cards for our staff or $25 gift cards for our staff. And we would give them, you know, a burrito party. So it's just about how you think about what you need and how to develop the relationship. And if it works for both parties, you solidify a great relationship there. And the same person isn't going to go for a fast casual burrito at the same time as they would go for a sit-down steak dinner. So you're not competing against yourself. Sure, are there times you might lose a customer either way? Of course there are. But by just putting out what's good, by acting altruistically, that good comes back to you. I could say karma. Maybe some people don't believe in that, but I think those strategic business relationships develop into future business as well. And just real quickly, I'll give you an example of that. I had another business owner that was in the exact same fast casual space as I was, and he sold his business. And he had done so much catering as a business owner. And he knew me just from being friendly, being reciprocal. And he came back to me when he got out of the restaurant business and said, you should go after, you know, a contract with the Naval Academy. You know, they do this really big scope catering. And I can't tell you that relationship, that introduction that he made for me was a very important piece of my business for the next, you know, 7 years or more. So reciprocity pays.
Yeah, and so let's flip this back around to your network. So if you're a business owner who is used to networking at official functions, right? Let's say that you go to a chamber function or you know, a business association, or there's some sort of meetup piece that you're doing, and you're very used to networking that way. You show up, you have your business cards, you introduce yourself, you hand out your cards, there you go. And now you've been sitting at home for a period of time. And even now with some of the reopening, we're still not seeing these gatherings and these network events and so on. And if you are like, wow, my network is dried up, I would contend that you're missing the point of a network. You're one of those folks, if that's the case, who you don't even want to run into, because all they're doing is showing up, handing out a business card, looking for something to come to them, right? You know, hey, I need business, I need business, I need business. Right now is the time for you to really mine that network. You know, get on your LinkedIn and go through and figure out, like, wow, does this person and this person know each other, right? They really should. Let me make an introduction. You know, wow, this is somebody who I think would be a great collaborator, have a business that runs right in tandem with this person over here. I'm going to make that introduction. And you putting that out, making those contacts, having those conversations, forcing that issue, that is true networking, right? And here's the thing. If you have the reciprocity gene, that means that when something comes to you, you want to give back. And what I think happens here is you put out a whole lot out there of you just doing that. And those who have the reciprocity gene are going to re-engage, and those who don't aren't. And that quickly becomes a good network for you, because those who are then engaging have reciprocity. So then you're engaging. Now this is a mutual thing. How many times have you done something for another person? You've given them a lead, you've done something, and there was no acknowledgement, nothing came back. I actually had this happen. I had a lady who came to me. She was introduced initially. I met with her and all. She had an intriguing service. I was like, oh, that's really interesting. I may have a client for you. So I did a little back and forth with her, make sure I was comfortable with her. And then I said, okay, let me make this introduction. And I paved the way. I made the introduction. I worked it all the way through. I made it so that she went in, she got this contract, and she performed fine. She did a fine job for the client and all. However, She never said thank you. She never, nothing ever came back. Like there was no introductions back, and there wasn't even contact. She didn't even maintain the relationship, which makes no sense to me. If somebody gave you a contract of that size, you'd think you would just maintain the relationship. So nothing happened. Well, the funny thing is, I was accidentally reintroduced to her probably 2 years later. And I don't think she even realized who I was until we'd gone kind of down the road of this reintroduction. I knew who she was, but I'm not sure if she knew who I was. So when the reintroduction happened, like I'm very polite. I was fine. I just went about our conversation and all. But what was funny is at the end of it, we caught up and it was a good conversation. I haven't heard from her since. So that makes no sense. On the face of it, it makes no sense. So right now, you should be working your network. And I don't mean working at like putting out advertisements and being on social media and being noisy. I mean making connections, seeing who can meet who, keeping that going, because that's the real networking. That's where your network's engaged, not you're part of something called networking.
So Patrick, you touched on something really important there that I think it's important for us to slow down and look at. When you go out and you do all this proactive introduction, think about what the benefit is for each of the people, and don't merely introduce people because, you know, you have to be careful in the way that you do it and that you are thoughtful about it. And I think one nice thing to do is to call people and say, hey, I know this person. Here's why I think it would be good for you to connect. Is it a good time for you? Blah, blah, blah. And not just do it blindly, because it can almost come across as spam. If out of nowhere, you're like, oh, I'm connecting the two of you, it almost looks, can look self-serving unless you know that it's serving a purpose in that person's business. And what were you going to say? You look like you're going to say something.
Well, no, I think you're right on track. Keep going.
So that was one part of it. And then when you're talking about not letting, once you've made that introduction, you have to have a practice in your in mind for how you want to keep in touch with people, because I think people are open to being part of your network, but it feels a lot more authentic and genuine if you have a regular relationship for communicating.
And that's interesting, because I have another networking guru who is a friend of mine who based everything off of a book, and I believe the title is Never Eat Alone. And what he had done is he had read this book and he's like, wait a minute. You're going to eat lunch every day. You know, you're going to go out to happy hours. You're going to do these things. Why not make them productive? Because the best conversations happen when people aren't putting up fronts, or there isn't like okay, there's something to be gained here. I'm driving towards it. But when there's a sharing of, okay, what are our connections? How do we function together? What does this look like? You know, is there a connection? Can we benefit each other? And if that's done sincerely, things do happen. So when you're talking about that, I think everybody has their favorite method of communication. Some people want to get on the phone. Some people want to text. Some people want to be on social media. Some people want to email. I mean, all the various things. That's one of the first questions that probably should be asked, right? What's your preferred method of communication? Now that you know that, make a note of it and communicate that way. You know, it's one thing if somebody tells you I hate email, and then your way of trying to interact with them is to keep shooting them off some emails, right? It's not going to go over well. So we don't want it to be self-serving or, you know, like all sort of manipulated, but at the same time, be thoughtful and intentional and do it right. And it doesn't have to be a self-serving thing. You know, one of the things that you see in a lot of these BNI groups or Sun groups or these networking things, there generally ends up being, you know, let's say you have a group of 20, there usually is probably 6 to 8 that are active and they're passing stuff around and it's really working for them. And then there's a whole larger group generally that gets a one-off here or a one-off there, and you don't see them engaged. Now, some of that's industry. I'm sure some of that is what's the relevant stuff, but some of it is not engaging in a way that encourages others to engage back in that way. I mean, it is reciprocity. If you put something out, stuff is going to come back. Let's say you throw 10 out there and 3 come back. Well, guess what? Now you're engaged with those 3 and you already know they're likely to send stuff back. So that starts building. Those 7 that never sent anything back, okay, gives you more time, right? You're not handing out business cards because you're supposed to. And I think that's one of the biggest frustrations with some of those groups is the requirement that you always hand a business card every session to everybody. And so you're just making stuff up. That I don't see that being valuable. There are people in your network who should know each other. Figure it out. Help it happen. Help make it happen.
I agree. And there's no excuses to be made right now. People are in front of their computers more than ever. And if we can't get out there and network in real life, in person, all the more reason to dedicate the same amount of time per week and figure out how to do it remotely.
Figure out how to do it remotely and individually. Like now the person on the other end is just as not busy as you are just as not busy right now. If there was ever a time for making those personal, more meaningful one-to-ones, conversation introductions, you can fit a lot of them in now. I mean, you just can. And I think it gives a sense of purpose to everybody too. You know, there's a sense of purpose to what you're doing, but they also will engage because, right, there's activity. There's this, oh, wow, maybe this will lead to something. And I'm not doing anything. This is an activity that I can see as being beneficial.
Well, not only that, Patrick, but I don't know if you've had any of your health service providers or anybody else that you have a regular relationship just reach out and ask you, how are you? I have, and I can tell you, I feel like those businesses care about me. And the same thing is true for our peer, business relationships. Call and ask your contacts, how are you doing with this whole thing? How's your business doing? I'm thinking about you. I might have a lead for you or whatever. If it's genuine, heartfelt, and authentic, it's going to go a long way.
It absolutely is. And we're talking about you being the initiator of this. But let's talk about the other side too. Those of you who heard me say reciprocity, Gene, and tell the story of no reciprocity, be honest with yourself. Do you have the reciprocity gene? Or are you just focused on what you need at all times? Because those who have the reciprocity gene end up magnetically attracting all sorts of stuff. Because, like I said, if I'm giving you something and something comes back, I'm tuned into you now, right? And it's not quid pro quo. It's not like, okay, if you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. There's a truth in that, but that's not the intent of it. The intent of it is I'm handing out stuff all the time to folks, and I do it unsolicited. I'm like, oh, wow, you should know this person. And oh, I know somebody who does that. But my attention stays on those who stay connected to me, who do respond and who do send things back and who do let me know how they did with that client and who do make that relationship something. Somebody just goes, oh, hey, thanks, and disappears with the business, and I never hear from them again. It's not I'm punishing them, but there isn't a natural engagement there. That doesn't work. So if you don't have the reciprocity gene, develop it. It's something that will help you, and people will appreciate that you have it.
Agreed 100%. If you live in fear and scarcity, it's a lonely world out there as a business owner. So reach out to people and start your reciprocity practice today.
Perfect.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in once again to listen to the Reimagining Main Street podcast with Patrick Lee and myself, Laura Richards. We'll see you Thursday at 3 o'clock. And until then, take care.
Bye, everybody.